As a contract expert within the construction and development industry with close to a decade's worth of experience, I have first-hand experience in seeing how a single variation, if not managed correctly, can derail the entire project, lead up to costly disputes, and even jeopardize your relationship with the business shareholders. So, in this video, I am going to break down what exactly a variation is, how to manage these variations, and firstly and most importantly, how to really avoid these variations in the first place. So, to start the video with a simple question, what a variation is, to a simple answer to this in layman's term is anything additional to your existing contract is known as a variation. Deviating from your existing contract in place is known as a variation. For example, if as a developer you hire a contractor to build yourself 10 townhouses, and instead of building 10 townhouses now you want to build 12, that is going to be called a variation. So variations can be seen across multiple industries. It's not just specific to development or construction. It has been issued in sort of financial industries as well. But from what I have seen, and the main sort of 4 contracts where I have seen variation is where I'm giving these example for. So firstly, in the development contracts, as a head contract to a contractor, as you being the developer, if you have hired a contractor to build you, like I said, 10 townhouses at a hypothetical number of $2 million, and you want to go ahead and build 5 additional townhouses, that now is a contract variation. You are deviating from the works that were previously agreed to within the contract, and therefore that is known and is called a variation within the development contract. In a construction contract would be something similar, when a contractor goes out and hires a subcontractor to complete a few works, and in return they want additional works to be completed which are not stated within the contract. That will be a construction contract variation. Now, I have also seen variation within state level and federal contract or permits. Now, state level permits, also known as planning permits in Victoria, known as building approval in ACT and Sydney and other states of Australia, a planning permit will exactly entitle what you are supposed to deliver with that development. Now, sometimes the developers, just to increase the feasibility and profitability of that property, they want to enhance and improve the number of dwellings they're putting in that particular development. Therefore, they want to go and apply for a variation, which means a variation permit, which is again known as a secondary consent permit. So when you apply for that, that is known as a variation as well within the state and federal contracts. Another one is known as trade contracts. I have already covered this up over here. It's essentially the same thing, so there's nothing more to discuss there. I am going to now lead up to the major factors as to firstly how you can avoid variation. This is more or less sort of things that sometimes you may be able to avoid and sometimes you won't be able to avoid. So as an individual as well, if you're watching and you're hiring someone for their services, even in the legal industry, if you're hiring a lawyer, they will give you a scope of services or scope of works which will tell exactly what they need to do. For example, a very clear and straightforward example, and many people might relate to this or might actually have this problem in the future, which is going to be buying a house, as simple as that, or selling a house, as simple as that. So if you're buying a house or you're selling a house, you're going to engage a conveyancer, solicitor, lawyer, whatever you want to call them, it's all the same. You're going to engage them. They are going to provide you with a scope of services which is going to clearly tell you what includes within those services, which is going to be from creating a sales of contract or reviewing a buyer's contract, then telling you exactly when to settle, what are the obligations that you need to fulfill prior to settling, also telling you what is the shortfall or the amount of coverage that you need for your loan, what the stamp duty process is, and how to actually get the stamp duty entitled within that particular council, state level, federal level, whatever it may be. They're also going to go and settle the property with PEXA, which is an sort of entity that does settling between the seller or buyer and as a third party, including the banks in the middle. So the lawyers are going to have to be a PEXA certified lawyer to actually go ahead within PEXA to do the settlement. So they are going to give you a list of scope of services that you need to do, that they need to do within these services for X amount of price. Now, if you want to go ahead and tell them that, you know what, I'm buying this property, but I also want to negotiate my contract. So negotiation of the contract could include something as simple as the fact that you want the seller to, or as a buyer, you know, you want them to put up, for example, fences around your boundary of the house. That now becomes a variation to the existing scope of services to the lawyer, because the lawyer now has to go out and negotiate on those terms and has to invest more times, which again leads up to more variations. So major factors prior to actually issuing a instruction of variation, you need to ensure that you consider these 4 things, and once you are in consideration of these 4 things, then you can obviously go ahead and make your decision whatever way pleases you. So before starting all of this, actually just one more important thing, which is to state out there, a variation isn't actually considered a variation until you give them a formal written advice to proceed with those works. So the developers listening out there, just make sure that before you do issue the written formal direction to proceed with additional variation works, just make sure that you understand what the scope of that works is. What is it going to cost you monetarily? Being an extremely important one. Like I said, if you're going to tell them to make me, instead of 10 townhouses, now you want them to make additional 5 townhouses, that's going to come at a cost. It's not going to come for free. So whatever the cost is, you need to be able to justify that, and maybe you will have to do your feasibilities. Is it worth me investing into those additional 5 townhouses? And if it is, then how much return I'm going to get on my investment, and all those factors which are part of your monetary investigation prior to issuing a variation. Secondly will be time. Time is another big factor. Now you may say that yes, I have a good feasibility, I can get a good amount of return on investment within this additional 5 townhouses, but what you don't know is additional time that it's going to cost you to get those additional 5 townhouses delivered. Maybe you have a deadline with your existing buyers who want to get their houses, say in 2026 year, and if you want to add these additional 5 townhouses, it may blow up your project out to being delivered in 2027. And not only that, it may even blow, in some scenarios, blow out the proportion of your building approval allowance, so whatever you're allowed to stay within that period. And in other contexts, that would include, say, if you are as a buyer or seller buying or selling a house, if you want to get more terms negotiated, it's going to take a certain amount of time. So time is an important factor that needs to be considered prior to issuing an instruction of variation. Another thing could be the quality. Now, I have emphasized quality in many of my other videos, and I'm going to say it again. Quality does come at a cost of time, additional money. You may get the best quality. So within variation, sometimes it's a very underlooked item, quality. You do need to look at what's the quality that you're getting in return, as to when you do put forward a variation of instruction with your contractor or with your lawyer or whoever you want to instruct to do the variation. You need to ensure that is that the quality that I will be receiving as I was promised prior. So quality, another important one. Now, shareholder impact is one important essential key to look for when you're doing a variation. A lot of people do not understand or even look at these things when they're issuing a variation. When you do issue a variation, for example, as a developer, first thing that you should really consider is the banks and investors, i.e. meaning that if you are a developer and you are issuing a variation to the contractor to go ahead and make more houses, you're going to have a reciprocal, it's going to have an effect to your banks and to investors. In some instances, banks don't really like variations. You may get a hoax variation, say for example, which could be that the site that you're building your townhouses on or you're building on is contaminated. Now that's going to include, that wasn't included within the contractor's price to remove contaminated soil, because you couldn't have known. Now that is going to come at additional cost from the contractor, which is going to cost additional money. So prior to issuing your variation, and even before you starting your project, you need to have, say your budget is $2 million from the bank. Now you need to be able to finish the construction within $1.5 million. That doesn't mean you have $2 million to spare. The additional $500,000 should be treated as a contingency. I'm going to speak more about the budgeting and the feasibility of the projects from a developer's perspective in a different video, but for this video, like I said, the banks sometimes don't really like the additional variations within the existing contracts as a lender, or if you're getting your money from an investor, they might not actually like for you to go out and issue a variation, because it may come at a cost, and the investor may want their money a long time before as to what they sort of were advised to previously. So be careful with, just make sure that your aspect of the banks and investors is pretty clear and is concise, and they have been communicated well to, and they are obviously adhering to this variation as well. So I'll give you a case study, an example of this scenario with the banks and investors, and why I'm emphasizing on this too much is because, for example, you may be developing, say, 30 units. Now those 30 units are actually coming from, the money for that unit is coming from a pool of investors who has gone and already bought 20 units within those 30 units that you have invested, that you have been proposed to develop. Now those investors have given you the money to develop the 30 units and give us 20 units handed over to us by the end of 2026. Now if you start your project in 2025 and you add another variation to it, and it may cause the program to blow up by the 2027, that investor those pool of investors were expecting their property to be delivered by the end of 2026, so they can put their units up on rental to get the rental income. This is where the problem comes. This is where the variation can become an issue, when the variation is going to add on to the time. So make sure that you consult with the banks and the investors prior to issuing a variation, because I have seen multiple issues with developers when they do this, and the banks or the investors don't actually want to lend them additional money unless they have an additional contingency within their budget, like I discussed previously. Then that's a separate story. Another one may be the public/governments. Now they are an important shareholder within any development. It doesn't matter who you are or what you're developing. If you delay a government project or a development for a certain period of time because you want to go ahead with this variation without consulting the government or the local council and instructing the public, in some instances it can be an issue. It's not a big issue, you can get past it, but it can be an issue and something to be considered. So for example, I'll give you an example. If you are building a sporting complex, for example, and you have told the government we are going to be inaugurating it on this date, and for some reason you add a variation which you want to go ahead with, to add some specific thing to the facade, for example, without consulting the government or telling them that, look, we are going through this variation and it's going to cause future disruption for another, say, 3 to 4 months, and the public won't be able to access this area. The government may be like, look, you promised us this and we hold a bond on you for, say, $10,000. That bond won't be released until you do finish your work. So that is another issue with variations. Sometimes the government may request you to issue them with a bond so that they can uphold you with the works as you promised to complete. So I'm going to wrap up this video here. We're going to keep it short and simple. These are some of the things, like I said, you need to consider. Now you know exactly what a variation is, firstly, and in the contracts you can see the variations very easily, and now you have all these other factors like money, time, quality, and shareholders that you can consider. And in the last part of this video, we're going to actually go with just have a comprehensive and enhanced review of your scope of works, so you don't get these variations in the first place. But more or less you do face these variations. So just consider these things, and I hope this video was useful. So please do like, subscribe and share, and I'll see you in another video. Thanks.